It's really a privilege and a pleasure to speak to you today about this important topic. And first of all, Nicola already spoke to you about the importance of the Capital Market Union Action Plan, and I can't underline as much as I could the importance of that. I really welcome the initiative that the European Commission took on, first as part of the Green Paper, and then in form of an action plan to really take away barriers or potential barriers for SMEs to access capital. So in that regard, it's really good to talk today about the role of financial reporting and how it can help in achieving the goals that the European Commission has set. No matter how a company is financed, and Olivier already referred to this, whether you're listed, unlisted, whether you seek family capital, whether you seek bank financing, whether you look for venture capitalists or private equity funds, you always will find that no one is really interested in providing capital without having a proper understanding of the financial position and performance of the company. So some form of financial reporting is always required, otherwise the capital market unit cannot function appropriately. So bear that in mind when over the next few years this topic is going to be discussed, because no matter what is going to happen, financial reporting will always play a role. So it's a great opportunity, and I also like to thank QED for organizing this, to talk about this. And as Nicola said, we're only at the beginning of a discussion, and so let's make sure we have all the ingredients for that discussion and to move things forward, because there's a lot of constituents and stakeholders that have a view and also have ideas and can contribute to this debate. So what I'd like to do in this presentation is to take you through the landscape of accounting standards for SMEs today, because you probably have an idea of where we're starting from before we can move on. Then provide you some feedback on what we see out there as feedback from investors, because in the end, financial reporting is all about providing and communicating financial information to those who need to make conscious and well-founded decisions on providing capital. Some perspectives from outside the EU, and then, just like Olivier did, some food for thought for policymakers in what some considerations are in whether or not separate set of accounting standards should be developed for EU SMEs, particularly for the growth market, and some concluding remarks. So. And probably I need to apologize for our next slide. It looks a little busy. There's lots of colors here. But this is only a simplified version of the current sets of accounting standards we have today in the European Union that are available for EU SMEs. So let me just try to take you quickly through this one. If you start left side, for listed SMEs, I need to make a distinction between those that are listed on the regulated market and those that are listed on the unregulated market. Those listed on the regulated market, those have to apply EU IFRS, so the International Financial Reporting Standards as endorsed by the European Union. And there's no exemptions, whether you're small, large, or anything in between. So any of the other gaps is prohibited. If you're, however, listed on the unregulated market, it depends. It depends on the listing rules of the respective market. It also may depend on the local member state rules for financial reporting. And I'll give you an example of that in a second. If you're unlisted, then it depends. As Olivier already referred to, we have the accounting directive that makes a distinction between large, medium-sized, small and micro entities, each with their own set of accounting standards, sometimes with just a difference in disclosure, sometimes also with a difference in accounting. All member states have their different ways of implementing these different sets of accounting standards. So in theory, you might have, and I just want to make sure I got my numbers right, because got 112 different permutations of member state options, plus the two, so EU IFRS and IFRS for SMEs, which I'll come back on next. So we've got about 114 different combinations. Why did I put IFRS for SMEs there? Neither the IAS regulation, the EU regulation refers to it, nor is there specific acceptance of IFRS for SMEs in the accounting directive. First of all, it is prohibited for listed companies simply because, as Olivier said, IFRS for SMEs was developed by the IASB specifically for the unlisted entities. It specifically says this should not be applied by those having gone public. So it's only optional for those that are unlisted. However, member states may have accounting standards mandatory that are somehow inconsistent with IFRS for SMEs, and therefore you can't apply it anyway. So it depends on the member state options. And everything that's yellow is for the rest is more or less optional to SMEs. Of course, if you're medium size, you can't apply the small local gap or the micro local gap because you would simply surpass the thresholds. So this gives you a little bit of background, and please note that listed means listed debt or equity. So whether you got bonds or shares listed doesn't really matter. So where's the Capital Markets Union Action Plan going to affect this? Well, of course, so to the extent the Capital Markets Union Action Plan refers to listed, whether regulated or unregulated, it's going to affect the left-hand side. To the extent it refers to bank financing, private equity, venture capital funds, it's more to the right, because that would mean it's for unlisted entities. Does that necessarily mean you have to have the same rules for all SMEs? Well, not necessarily, because you got different investors maybe having different needs. So that needs to be further explored. In terms of the unregulated market, because the action plan specifically mentioned the MTF, as Nicola referred to, let me give you two illustrations. This is the Alternex Paris market. The Alternex Paris market is an unregulated stock exchange. It allows IFRS as well as local GAAP, which mainly means French GAAP, because these are French companies mainly. What we see is that, and this is also what French standard setter reported on, about a quarter of the listed entities applies EU IFRS. About half apply local GAAP, so that's mainly French GAAP, and 1/4 applies local GAAP, but that is because they don't produce group financial statements. And if you don't produce group financial statements, the IAS regulation doesn't apply, and therefore it's basically local GAAP to begin with. You're not really comparable to group financial statements of others. As you can imagine, SMEs may be so small that they only have one entity and not a group of entity like most other groups of companies. What is so special about companies producing only separate financial statements? In most countries, those separate financial statements are also used for tax purposes. So as soon as you start to deal with financial reporting rules for these separate financial statements, you run the risk of having tax effects. This was one of the main reasons why the IAS regulation only deals with consolidated financial statements.